I am
That was
Megan
more
Carter.
fun.
I'm the director of SDC Foundation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight for a conversation between two visionary, extraordinarily smart artists. Lear DeBessonet and Bogart are going to talk about all manner of things tonight, and because they're both such curious, inquisitive people, I am not moderating. They're going to moderate themselves. It's going to be amazing. But I am going to kick them off with a question, which is that in this business, we talk a lot about collaboration. And both of you have wrangled with collaboration in a really intimate, complicated way. Because it's a word that we use, but I don't think people think about how difficult it is. So if we'll just kick off by having one of you talk about your philosophy of collaboration, and we'll go from there.
Yes.
I'll jump in.
Yes, Anne.
Yes, Lear. First of all, I'm delighted to be here and with Lear, which is a special privilege because she's so groovy. Anyway, thank you for being here on such a cold night. And, and collaboration is a passion of mine, and I guess it would be a core value as well. You know, the things that you, what is it that Ben Cameron says, what would you go back to the mat for every single time? Like, what would you not do a project if it wasn't there? And if a project was not to be collaborative, I wouldn't do it. It is a core value. And there are reasons for it, but I just would start out by saying, and I think Megan knows this very well because she's been around my company a lot, which is that collaboration does not mean agreement whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I think there's something one could call the disease of agreement and a misunderstanding about agreement. And collaboration is really a disagreement with respect. And in a way, the worst thing, the nightmare for me in a rehearsal is, I guess you would say, is the word want. If somebody says, Anne, is this what you want? In that moment, I feel like what I want to do is go home. And as a matter of fact, what I want is a little obscene and has nothing to do with the play. And what about what the play wants? And that also I feel like that word is perhaps killing the American theater, in that if a rehearsal situation is about doing what the director wants, then you set up a parent-child relationship, which I have absolutely no interest in a rehearsal. Family maybe, a certain kind of family, but parent-child not. So it's hard. It really feels like toiling in the mines, M-I-N-E-S. It's difficult, but it's also what brings substance, because if a rehearsal is about doing what I propose, then that's all that gets done. But if my proposition is disagreed with and turned on its side and jumped on and tossed up in the air and thrown around, it starts to move and it starts to become something. And I will say something, I probably maybe this will get me into trouble, but with many people. But I usually work with City Company, and it's a very difficult collaboration that I am dedicated to. But I am working on a piece with the magnificent Carl Hancock Rux and Theo Bleckman. It's a piece called The Exalted, and it's just a two-person piece. And I went in to help them out, rehearse it. Yes, I'm directing it. I finally said, yes, I'm actually directing it. And I would say, you know, Carl, why don't you start upstage left and Theo downstage right? And they said, that's genius, Anne. That's amazing. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. And the next,
not used to that affirmation.
No. And the next direction I gave, they said, Anne, that is so great. And I thought, 20 years I haven't heard that. So, you know, it's fun not, no, I'm collaborating with them, but it's, I guess I just want to start by saying it's not necessarily something that makes you sleep easier at night.
Mm-hmm. What is a better word than want?
Well, it's always important to find the right question to ask. And is this what you want is never an interesting question. I also think words like, I hate it if an actor says, or anybody in the room says, I'm confused.
I hate that as well.
Because that's not an interesting thing to say. So in the moment, in the moment that you want to say, I'm confused, or what do you want, ask a question that's actually useful in the room.
Yes, it's going to forward the conversation.
Yeah, so okay, from the state of confusion, that's not to say you're not confused, but from that state, what do you ask that actually is helpful? In the same way as what do you want is not helpful. Now I will end, and then you have to talk about collaboration too, but I will say I got into an argument with Joanne Akelitis about this when I had told her my theory about want, and she said, well, I use the word want, and when I want something, I want it. And I thought, yes, and that's when you should use it, like when you own it. So sometimes I will say, I really want this to be great, you know, but it's consciously. And I think that Joanne's passion about wanting is right. It's just the unconscious use of words that shut a collaboration down. And I think the words are the key to how we create creative relationships.
Yeah.
But you collaborate with extraordinary people from different backgrounds, in addition to actors and designers. And how the hell do you do that?
Well, I feel like my investigation of collaboration is constantly widening in terms of the number of variables introduced. And I think early on, because Anne was my mentor, I'm sure at some point tonight we will maybe acknowledge that in a proper way. This woman changed my life, is the reason that I moved to New York and became a director. And I feel like actually your thinking about collaboration very much influenced how I thought about a rehearsal room, how I thought about the role of other voices in the process. And so I think for the first maybe 7 years of my work in New York, that was mostly working with other people who self-identified as artists. And over the, I guess, years since then, I have really been expanding into mostly working with people that do not self-identify as artists, or if they do self-identify as you know, a Bollywood dance company or a marching band or something that they're artists but not necessarily theater artists, and that collaboration, a lot of the same principles apply. Of course, it's still the basics of communication, listening, articulation. I think very much trying to really see one another in a real way and recognize the magic that someone else is bringing and meet it and try to find a way to let that magic live in the piece that you're making, find a way to extend and inhabit it more fully. But there is, I think, the consideration. Once you remove the assumption that you have the same set of vocabulary, which, you know, with theater artists, we can make some assumptions about vocabulary that in my work now with public works, I can no longer make those assumptions. And I actually have found that freeing and exhilarating and better for the work, because in fact, you know, when I'm having a conversation with whether it is community members from one of the partner organizations that we work with, the men and women that are formerly incarcerated who are now working with our program and performing, or the marching band, or whoever, the taiko drummers, it actually makes us, we are talking about the story, we're talking about the moment in the story that we're trying to communicate to the audience, and the absence of any sort of jargon, the absence of any like theatery, you know, terms like, I can't even make an assumption that if I say like, strike the chair, like strike it, it is not, you know, those words don't necessarily work. And so it requires a sort of extra care and precision, yeah.
But there's so few people who could actually do what you're doing, because they would turn it into either a didactic situation, a bossy situation, But the thing that I feel with you, and I certainly felt it just when you were with my students, that how incredibly inclusive you are.
Oh, thank you.
And,
well,
yeah.
I would say, for me, inclusivity is a core value. That
Right.
is at the core of what interests me, and at the core of the things that interested me about theater to begin with. And as we've talked about before, the things that I think of as my theatrical roots were not professional theater. It was church and Mardi Gras, to some extent football games. But and I know that a church does not hold the connotation of being inclusive very often, but the context in which I encountered it was really about, this is a place where everyone is welcome, and where the lens of value that the larger society applies to people, of whose voice matters, who is worth talking to, who's worth knowing, that is inverted. And yeah, so I still think about those things constantly, and I want to be in rooms that are inclusive in that way.
Well, I think I'd like to propose a theory I've been thinking about a lot in the last
Please, yes.
year, and I think it relates to your work in a very different, particularly with different communities, because I know you actually do a lot of different kinds of work. I mean,
Yeah.
so so what I've been thinking about is that what distinguishes the theater from any other art form is that it is always about community. That's its subject. So, but on many, many levels. So no other art form does that. Visual art doesn't, music doesn't, dance doesn't. But every play asks the question, how are we getting along? And how can we get along better? And so a play has the question, you know, the Greeks obviously always go to the Greeks. You know, this guy kills his father and sleeps with his mother, and the whole social system is upset, and the play is about refinding harmony from a state of in disharmony. And so plays are, but every play, Death of a Salesman, everything, they're all about social systems that are usually compromised, that help us see our own social system. But in addition to that, there's a whole lot of other layers. So the audience is, from the prefrontal cortex part of the brain, is taking in this story about community. But on another level, the audience is also taking in a story that is reaching them on a less logical sense, which is, how are these actors getting along on the stage? What kind of community do they create? But then it gets even more interesting, because then you have, how is the audience getting along?
Yes.
Are they teaching each other how to watch the play? How is the audience and the actors getting along? And so our subject matter is community. Our materials is time. Like a sculptor has clay, a visual artist has paint. We have issues of time. So that's what we're molding, correct? So I'm going to take this one step further to bring it to what you're doing also. So in my own work, I work with a company for 23, 4, I don't know, years. It gets confusing. And after many, many plays about things that are interesting, I had to ask myself, well, so this is a company that's very trained. They work all the time, but in service of what? Is it in service of doing another play? Or at a certain point you have to say, okay, that's good up to a certain point, but now what? And I thought, well, this issue of community is very interesting. And I have a strong community that does get along really well, and it is visible and feelable on the stage how they interact with each other. So what is interesting to me is to put them in relation to another community that is as strong. And hence began a series of projects that started with the Martha Graham Dance Company, American Document, which we were talking about before, where this dance company and this theater company make work. Also did it with Bill T. Jones, Wright, and his company. We did it last year with the Bang on the Can ensemble with a group of musicians, and now we're doing it with Ann Hamilton, the visual artist, to sort of find out what happens when two communities collide, not necessarily just I'm comfortable doing a play, but how do we create something together? So that, I think we have in common something, that you're taking communities, your issue is community. And your issue is the community in the room and the community of the experience. But you have communities from literally different communities coming together. And I wonder, what does that feel like to be in the room when there is real cultural exchange happening, and how does that affect the experience of the audience?
Yes. I feel like I want to actually go back. I mean, I want to answer your question, but my brain also was like one step back in what you were saying in describing those different collisions that you've now orchestrated for your company and another sort of equal and opposing force, right? Which is, it seems like there's, I'm sure, a physics principle somewhere to be found in there.
Always.
But how has the nature of that collision been different? What have you learned because you've now done it with a couple of different variables? Are there things that have been true about all of it?
Is that the work is new. It feels completely different. The work that we made with Bill T. Jones and his company feels completely something like that neither Bill nor I as directors would have done on our own. And so it's kind of creating new experiences of what aesthetics are. And aesthetics are actually just mean how things feel etymologically. It's the opposite of anesthetic, it's feeling. So new feelings on the stage. So, and always super challenging and difficult.
Have you ever done a project that has not been difficult?
Damn you. No. Have you?
Wow. I definitely find some much more difficult than others.
Yeah.
So I would not say that there is a steady level of difficult. I would say that it varies. But I actually feel like one of the things that I have enjoyed so much about the way that engaging with community has kind of cracked my work open is I feel like on this, I agree with you that disagreement is an essential part of collaboration. I also feel like, that's something that I have had to adapt to because I'm Southern. People don't, to be aggressive verbally and to directly disagree with what another person says is going against, the way that I was raised, the way that everybody that I knew growing up interacted. And I feel like there is something that I can tolerate that kind of disagreement much more peacefully and happily when it is in the context of working towards a kind of unified goal that we've all agreed upon that is bigger than any one person and that therefore is already sort of eliminating ego as a valid reason for anyone disagreeing about something. It's like, it isn't about me, it isn't about you. We all know that this thing that we're doing is bigger. And in that context, for me, disagreement is lovely and welcome. So that is just a small tack-in point. I also am curious about what you're working on right now, and that in terms of the kind of three different communities that exist with any theater piece that you described, are you interested in? I feel like at one point in your work, I know you were interested in investigating something like the group theater and actually putting a community or a group on stage and examining that. Is that still an interest, or have you taken a turn into it?
You just slid out of answering the question I asked. Just slithered on out. But the answer to the question is yes. I mean, the subject of group is endlessly interesting to me. But more specifically, now the subject, I've used this example before, but I can't think of A better example, or B, a better place to say it in this kind of room, which is about music, which is Alfred Brendel, the great pianist who's famous for playing Beethoven sonatas, said that when he's playing a sonata, in concert, he'll get to the very last chord, and just before the last final chord, he lifts his hands and asks the audience how long they will allow him to wait until he plays that final chord. That's what interests me the most right now, is to figure that out, which is a reason why I will never ever grow disinterested in the theater or do anything that involves film or television, because that question is so vital. And it's made possible through the work of actors who can actually relate to audiences that way, which requires a certain amount of training, which requires a sense of community. So now I would repeat what I said before, is I'm saying, okay, community in service of what? I have helped to create a community that's very strong, a company that's very strong, but what for? What are you trained for? And for me, it's that thing.
Will you tell me the part of your question that I did not answer?
Well, it's just that here you get, the marching band in here, you get the kids from the community center in here.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of it. Shit's a-flying, right?
Yeah.
And not many people can handle that. And it takes a certain kind of, not only ability, but you have to like juggling, which I think any director has to. But
I feel like when you talk about directing as like controlling chaos is always the part of the project, right?
Or not controlling chaos.
Yes. Yeah, that actually is true. I feel like there's a fair amount of embracing entropy that is also part of those projects. From a process standpoint, when we were doing The Tempest or Winter's Tale, these 200-person productions that we've done in the park the last 2 summers, in both of those instances, there was, to some extent, much more granular planning than I have done for other projects. I mean, Chase Brock, the choreographer, and I, before rehearsal began, had a map with 200 little X's of the 200 bodies and where they would enter and exit at every moment of the show. And normally, obviously, I would not do that. I would discover that in the room with, I would do some planning, but I would want to leave open the possibility within the rehearsal room. With 200 people, that is not happening. You can, that would be a disaster. It's actually really crucial that the director has planned and does know, where everyone is going. That said, while on one hand that seems perhaps constricting or, allowing for less spontaneity, I also feel like there is like the ultimate flexibility required, because first of all, you're really up in people's reality, the reality of people's lives. And, to some extent we always are, but to a much larger extent, it's like someone isn't able to make it to rehearsal because, because they have addiction issues, because their mother died, because, they couldn't get off of work, because they didn't have money for a Metro card. And so there's like that, first of all, set of reality of meeting people really where they are and troubleshooting with them in terms of like, what will it take to make it possible for you to do this project? And so that's one type of flexibility. But also, I feel like, and this, I had my first like big kick in the ass lesson about this when I did the Don Quixote in Philadelphia. That was a collaboration with Broad Street Ministry, which is like a homeless shelter. And we had about 45 community members in that show, 5 professional actors, 45 people from the community performing, many of whom were currently homeless or had been recently, some of whom were dealing with mental illness. And we just sort of had to accept that there were, if you think about an algebraic equation, that, there were some numbers that could be relied upon, that we knew the value of, and there were some X's. And that, and somehow, in algebra, you still can get to the other side of the, you can still get equals, you can still know, but you just have to, in some ways you have to acknowledge those variables. So we had, in that case, there were a couple of parts of the show that, well, there was at half hour, the stage manager would call everyone together and say, okay guys, tonight Bruce and Dennis are not here. So, when you get to that part in the dance, just fill in. And when we get to the part of the story that they would tell, just skip it. And we just, and it was like, everyone was like, okay. And it actually, because we had sort of built enough infrastructure elsewhere to roll with that. And actually, I feel like the professional actors who are part of these projects, actors are so courageous and so inventive. And I feel like that invitation to them of like, look, I can't promise you, like, you're gonna be out on stage, 40 children are supposed to come running at you. It might not happen. And if in that event, you need to be prepared to do something. And I feel like my experience has been that professional actors are like both game and fantastic at that. Absolutely have the skills to ride that out and to make it work. And I can't imagine, I have not done any projects without professional actors, if that makes sense. Like that component of the person that is a master of fielding the unpredictable and being on their toes and in the moment, and holding the audience in their hand, because that's another thing the professional actors do in those shows, is they really,
take responsibility.
They take responsibility. In Winter's Tale, Chris Fitzgerald was playing Autolycus, and at the Sunday evening performance, we had from the audience a 4-year-old girl bolted onto the stage, and she had to run like 70 feet. It was like a real, so of course, first of all, the whole audience has seen her do this because, and Chris is up there trying to do his song, and suddenly, there's a rogue 4-year-old on the scene, and he just completely worked it. And of course, one of the stage managers, and a couple of minutes later, had to kind of sheepishly come on stage and take her by the hand and walk her off. The audience, applauded as she made her exit. And they actually, that was like a moment of great audience unity also. I feel like everyone in that audience, but the way to see Chris Fitzgerald navigate that entire situation was one of, so many like that he and the other professional actors deal with.
That it reminds me of so many pivotal issues about directing, and I would lead it with something that the Robert Altman, the film director, said. I heard it on one of these, DVD extras. Remember DVD extras? It was an interview with him, and he said, think of any 5 moments from any of my films that you like the best. I can guarantee you they were accidents.
Yes.
That he sets up a situation in which accidents can occur, and that's the point,
Yes.
And the second thing that makes me think of is that we've inherited, I think, due to film and film editing, actors think that their job is to do bits, because editing took away the notion that an actor is responsible for the whole arc of the play. So you get actors who you're watching doing bits rather than taking responsibility, but there's nothing more thrilling than watching an actor take responsibility. You watch Mark Rylance take responsibility for the whole play, or Alan Cumming, for Cabaret. It's a different experience when you watch an actor who's actually taking, and it's not just in the lead roles.
Absolutely.
So what you're saying is that a professional actor who's working with you suddenly is not doing his bit. He's actually taking responsibility for the whole, and that is a completely different experience of theater, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think about, Todd Almond, my composing partner, who also performs in these shows, and we're always very strategic about, how we utilize Todd. And one of his roles is to be, in The Tempest he played Ariel. In Winter's Tale, he was eaten by the bear. He had a slightly smaller part. But one of the things that is very present is we have, a both spoken and unspoken agreement between ourselves that's like, look, you know everything that needs to happen in this evening. You know what the story is that we're trying to tell. You know our intentions with the audience. Make it happen somehow. I don't care how. I mean, we will hope that things go right and that the taxi workers enter from stage left, but no matter what, I know that Todd has that baton of the story, of the event of the evening, and he is running with it, and he is not going to stop until
So you very wisely, you create anchors in your work.
Yes.
So the anchors allow there to be a lot of things that happen around it. So
Exactly.
I wonder, it's a little bit the question you turned on me, but when you go into a rehearsal with only professional actors, has this work with communities changed you?
Yeah.
And how would that be?
Yes. Well, I feel like, to some extent, in projects like in the Good Person of Szechuan that I did with Taylor Mack with the Foundry, I feel like a lot of the same sort of values that are present in the
Taylor Mack's another person who takes care of the whole.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. But I feel like the same values had kind of penetrated that project in every way, and that played out both in terms of the kind of room that we assembled. I mean, it was purposeful that the cast age span was 9 to 89, so that even though, again, it was professional actors, there still was the kind of, splendid spectrum of humanity, even in a micro way, that was kind of present. But yeah, I think that now when I work in a sort of exclusively professional context, I feel like, first of all, the community work has, I feel, made me a better director in terms of, again, forcing clarity of vision, forcing me to know, essentially to know which parts of the story, where the anchors are, and then where there is room for play. And so I feel like that, in a way, that the algebra idea still applies, of I set certain things very distinctly, and certain things are really non-negotiable, and then around that there's huge space for play. And yeah, and I think that also because I think I spend a lot of time thinking about and aware of what an enormous privilege it feels like to make art at all, to tell stories at all. I think it exists as a sort of possibility and promise for all humans. But obviously, in practice, many humans do not, are spending their lives trying to survive and are not able to devote themselves, certainly not in a full way, to artistic practice. And I think because of that, I also have lost tolerance for complaining, or just anything that I feel is sort of small-minded and actually forgetting the enormous privilege. I don't have time for now.
But I think we're both fairly nice people, and we don't necessarily, you don't engage when that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's like, rather than saying, you're wrong,
right,
don't be that way.
Right.
It's just go in another direction.
Go in another direction and don't hire that person again.
Right. It's what the Taoists call be round on the outside and square on the inside, which means be generous on the outside, but know exactly what you think on the inside, which is a good thing to cultivate. It occurs to me, though, also, as you were speaking about creating the algebra for a production, how important preparation is for any production you do, and how it has to be different for every production. In
yes.
other words, that your it's not to say that you prepare less in a show with professional actors, but how you prepare, and then what that preparation gives you the right to do, like basically walk in the room the first day, but the amount of preparation. And I don't know if you get this. People always think, you know, I'm always saying, well, be available to what's happening, be spontaneous, that means don't prepare. And I think you and I both are people who actually spend inordinate amount of time preparing.
Yes.
How do you prepare to do, say, Shakespeare?
Oh.
Or anything you'd like. I mean, maybe if you could talk about how you prepare.
And I want you to answer the same question. I'll answer, but you have to answer too. So I feel like, well, when working on one of these Shakespeare adaptations, I actually find that the process of doing the cut, and in our case, because we're doing musical adaptations, so we're also making choices about which moments are becoming songs, and that is enormously focusing. You know, that when you're trying to take a more than 3-hour play and make it 90 minutes, that in itself requires, I feel, you know, a deep immersion in the text. I feel like going back through many, many times. I mean, I, you know, make outlines and notes, and I think I'm also, you know, looking at, in the case of these particular, the public works Shakespeare's, I'm also thinking about it in terms of trying to give as many people as possible an entryway to the story. And
that's a big issue.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that very much informs the cut, and that lens remains present through the entire preparation and execution process, I would say. But then I also feel like, you know, the process of kind of staying emotionally and spiritually alive and nurturing oneself so one even has something to give is a much more, it's a harder to quantify process, right? Because it's like, that is taking walks, being in nature and listening to music and being with good friends, sharing food, and, you know, all of these many things that are sort of, I guess, the unconscious part of the process that then marries the real rigor of the text work, the research, all of that stuff.
That's true, isn't it? And I imagine there's a lot of directors in the room, since this is SDCF, but that our job is to create the circumstances in which people can feel agency, right? To participate, to create. So in a way, and we directors know how lonely being a director is, because you don't really get to hang out as much with everybody else is hanging out as you go home to work out the next problem. Anyway, but what we have to do is create the circumstances for our own lives in a way to actually find spaciousness, or to create the conditions so we can actually bring that to the room. And
yes.
And what that is pivotal to being able to be effective, I think.
Is that part of how you would say you prepare? That creating space?
Absolutely, and I think it's actually a discipline to create that space. And it has to be, to me, it has to be in things that are not the theater.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Well, you just had a nurturing experience.
I did. Well, actually, I'll answer 2 of your previous questions and that
one
in
good.
One, which is before you wanted to know what I was working on, kind of, sort of, right? And then you said, how do I prepare? How do you prepare?
Yeah.
And that nurturing situation. I'm going to describe the nuttiest piece I've ever done in my life that I'm working on right now. I mean, this is crazy. You won't believe it. It's so insane. I can't even believe I'm going to tell you about it. It's the name of this piece is called, I don't know what to call it. It's not a play. It's called The Theater is a Blank Page, all small letters. And it's a collaboration between City Company, myself, and Ann Hamilton, the visual artist. Now, if you don't know who she is, you will, when I remind you of what she did at the Armory 2 years ago, the swings, this extraordinary experience where, did you guys go to see it? I mean, she's an extraordinary artist. So, and we had talked about working together. Well, as you get into bed with her, now, don't take that literally, yes. you realize she's really got ideas that are just so unfamiliar to me. So we're creating an experience, and the preparation for this is a little bit like the algebra that you're having to do, or algorithms, because it's so complicated that you have to have it all prepared. Plus, we only have 2.5 weeks to put it up with the actors, so it takes a lot of preparation. It's about looking at big proscenium stage, so it has to happen in like a 2,500 seat house with one of those big old proscenium stages, and to ask how to reify, how to make this place new again, with all of the tools, the traps, the flies, all of the ancient, well, not ancient, since like 19th century, 18th century Italian, mostly those trap houses are, and create an experience for an audience where they experience this anew, and to create a place of spaciousness. So I started saying, Anne, you know, we live in a time, Anne Hamilton, we live in a time where time is getting faster. Internet time has taken us faster than MTV time used to take us. That, you know, that time is probably the most important issue to discuss, or one of them. And can we create an experience for an audience of spaciousness? And it works in tandem with another play I had done this last year called Steel Hammer, which is about work. And this is about the opposite of work. But the word is not play, and it's not vacation, but we finally came to the word, which is recreation, like recreation. And so I chose, the text is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, which is spacious. And it was the invention of modernism in this big text that takes place near an island, looking out in an island at a summer house. And the middle part, it's in 3 parts. It's shaped like an hourglass. In the middle section, nobody's in the house for about 30 pages. So using this as a text, how do we take 120 audiences, 6 actors, 9 assistants, and a crew through an experience, a 3-hour experience that's not an installation, it's not a play, where they actually spend time on this stage. So we realized that the audience will start way up in the balconies in this 2,500 seat theater, which will be, the first one will be the Wexner Center, the big Mershon, and look down at the stage where we introduce what the stage can do. Things can go up, things can go down, traps open, the magic of it. And then we lead the audience. They each have, there's 9 assistants who lead them backstage, through the backstage, onto the stage where now they cannot see the auditorium. They spend hours in there where things are going up and traps are opening, and you're hearing, I know, this is crazy, right? You're hearing To the Lighthouse. And at the very end of this 3 hours, the curtain reveals the 2,500 seats, which is now an ocean because it's covered with white cloth, Anne Hamilton. And there's a lighthouse way up in the balcony where they started, sort of turning.
Oh my God.
I know, you're giving us time.
I'm loath to I could sit here and listen to you all night. But I did want to give an opportunity for a few questions.
That was just a little soupçon of what we're trying to prepare. How the hell do you put that together in 2.5 weeks when you have union rules about traps and people falling into them, things coming down?
Yeah, we're going to have another conversation just about that. So we have time for questions. I have this handy microphone if anyone needs it. But questions from you guys? Yes, sir.
And you talked about the sense of
Hi, Matt.
I didn't see you. I miss you.
I'm on sabbatical.
Miss you. And Lear, share, I've seen two of your productions, and both, one was The Music Man, and the other was The Winter's Tale. And both of them, I felt this real communication of the audience. Like, the audience seems like it's those moments where we're all really on the edge of our seat. and I feel that it wasn't just in the moment when that little girl went on stage. It's like, throughout, there's this, and so I wonder, like, how do you talk to the actors, or how do you think in when you're preparing about that relationship with the audience?
With the audience, oh, yes. I actually find that I feel like I talk more when I'm working with just professional actors. There's more conversation about what the relationship with the audience will be. I feel like with community members, there is, in some ways, that phenomenon of the old adage about, like, professional actors not wanting to perform with dogs or children because they're too magnetic, they're too interesting, because they come out and there's a total authenticity and a total encounter that is happening, a dynamic encounter that lacks any of the kind of fakeness that can happen when a professional actor rehearses something many times, right? And I have found that to be true, that same dynamism and again, honesty, the just lack of artifice, happens more easily in the community context. So it's almost more like when I'm working with professional actors, how do you encourage that? And I think that just putting it out there as a value, first of all, begins the conversation. In something like, The Music Man I did in Minneapolis with a company called 10,000 Things. It was an 8-person production of The Music Man. It's happening in the round to tour to prisons and community centers, and the audience is, inches away from the performers in that context. And what Michelle Hensley has built with 10,000 Things is very much embracing the aspect of theater that is live, that is dialogue with an audience, and that in that context, all the lights are on. Her book just came out, actually. I encourage everyone to get Michelle Hensley's book. I think it's called All the Lights On. But it's about that, what happens when you have that, the actors and audience the lights are on, we're 2 inches from each other, the intimacy of being able to see, in that case, some of the extraordinary emotional places that actors can go, for an audience to be right there when it's happening, and to be able even to, so often they would comment on being able to, like, see that actor breathe, or like see a tear, or just something that, again, puts them in direct contact with the humanity of the performer, and also the humanity of the character that the performer is inhabiting. So I feel like it's constantly part of the goal that is laid out in the room, is knowing that this is the kind of communication that we want with an audience. And yeah.
I think that goes so well with Anne's theory of that everything is about the community. It's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you're working with a one-man or woman show, how do you create that same kind of community?
Oh, golly. There's no such thing as a one-man show or a one-woman show, because there's the director and the actor, which is already a semi-community. There's every technician. There's the light changes, the sound. The room is so full, and certainly working with a company members coming in, or any friends coming in. I think if you start thinking of it as a one-person show, you're down the wrong path. And then certainly that one person on the stage and their relationship to the audience is very particular, and that is also a community. But it's super engaged in, and must be you know, I mean, everything in the theater is about opposition, right? The lower you are to the floor, the more you need to think about being up. As you go downstage, you think about not going upstage. And in that sense, the smaller the cast, the bigger it actually has to be played in terms of reaching out. The bigger the cast, the more straight line you have to be as an actor. So I think a person playing a one-person show has to be like spider webs. And so I think you can get into wrong thinking with one-person show. I hope that's helpful.
No, that's good.
Yeah. And I love one-person shows too.
I would love to tell you guys, with both of you, the question, just off of your concept of the collaboration, what are the ethics of the director as well in terms of the collaboration? I mean, first of all, working with people who are not theater trained and things like that. And also, I mean, you see this less perhaps with professional actors, but with young up-and-comer or new people where they take on roles, you know, I'm thinking particularly of Leontes. That's a very psychologically difficult role. So to bring an actor into that situation, as a director, what is kind of the ethical, or is there, you know, an ethical responsibility?
I feel that there's an overriding ethical responsibility to be respectful, and you know, and I think it's in on every level for whoever is putting themselves in a situation when they're on stage, whether it's the 4-year-old kid, and that is an ethic that can't go away and allows you to disagree and to fight. But if there's respect, genuine respect, which is really hard earned, I think.
Yeah.
You agree?
Absolutely. I think that I mean, I think it's a very layered question because also I feel like the director is responsible for time, for both the audience's time and the actor's time. And part of that respect is even respecting the time that they're in rehearsal and respecting how their time is used, making sure that you know, every moment, every minute that they are there, that they are, you know, that they are being utilized, that the time that the director is watching over the whole experience. I feel like there is a responsibility to, I guess, at every moment, sort of hold in consideration this person, the actor, the community member as actor, as a kind of sacred thing that deserves.
You said
respect.
it. You said sacred.
I did. It had to happen at some point, you know, tonight.
There's somebody over here.
Yeah, I had a question for Lear. What was the experience like for the people without theater training, these people from different backgrounds? How would you measure what they took away from the experience, and what was their sense of community redefined?
Yeah. I think that, thank you for asking that. I think that probably, you know, not to escape the question, but I do think for each person, I think it is a little bit different. I don't want to assume that it is the same for everyone, but there are certainly kind of unifying principles that I have seen happen and that I do feel like are sort of carried across the group. I think that there is, you know, we talk a lot about theater as in terms of transformation, that we know that theater is transformational, or that it has been for us. I would say it has been for me, and I think the kind of transformation that happens relates to, first of all, the experience of really being seen, and of the power of being seen, which. Again, it plays out differently with different community members. One of the things that one of our amazing community partners is an organization called Domestic Workers United that is what it sounds like. It's a movement of women, mostly immigrant women, who are organized for fair labor standards. They are housekeepers, nannies, elderly caregivers, and one of the things, because they spend so much of their time organizing and fighting for these rights. And they have, many individual members of that group have talked to me about how powerful it has been to have, in the context of the show, they are not seen as what they do. Their identity is not the work that they do. It is actually their humanity beyond that. And I feel like, I think we all long for that. No one wants to be seen as just what they do, or something that the people from Fortune Society, the men and women who are coming out of prison, I've had members of that group comment on how freeing it is to not be pigeonholed and seen as the worst thing you've ever done, that is not your identity, that actually there is this humanity. And so, yeah, I think that people are released into a kind of fuller version of themselves, and that plays out in all sorts of ways. In terms of, we've had people who, yes, have ended up getting jobs. We had 2 community members, actually, one of the women from Domestic Workers United and one of the men from Fortune Society got married after Winter's Tale. It's like possibility just opening up at every turn. So.
On that extraordinarily hopeful note,
Could happen.
right here, nothing can top that. But I want to thank Anne and Lear for being here and sharing of their time and their beautiful energy. And thank you so much for coming, and come to the next one. Have a good night.
Thank you, Megan.